On today's show, the public turns on Trump, what that means for his border policy, what it means for funding, for ICE, and the midterms. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. The Wall Street Journal reporting that with fewer than 8 days to go, Democrats and Republicans are far apart on sealing a deal to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Punchbowl reporting that Senate Majority Leader John Thune is already prepping a new continuing resolution to keep the Department of Homeland Security funded past the deadline, saying he'll probably introduce it on Friday as both sides appear to drift further apart. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's sending his offer to Republicans by early today. Even he admits it's a long shot. That being said, Democrats appear to have voters on their side. ABC News reporting late Wednesday that a new Ipsos poll shows 62% of Americans think ICE and Trump have gone way too far on dealing with undocumented immigrants. A new Quinnipiac poll says half of all Americans say they know someone close to them who is fearful that they will get rounded up by ICE. Think about that. Half this country knows somebody who's terrified right now. Speaker Mike Johnson telling reporters Wednesday he might be able to compromise with the Democrats, especially when it comes to Schumer and Jeffrey demanding that ICE agents start wearing body cams. Mike Johnson, who fancies himself a constitutional scholar, saying he won't budge on forcing Homeland Security to rely on judicial warrants instead of administrative warrants. Those are signed by Homeland Security officials, not judges. I'll explain more on the difference between a judicial and administrative warrant later on in the show. It's very important, and it once again shows what liars Mike Johnson and the Republican Party are. Johnson also says he will not budge on masks, telling reporters it's just not safe to demand ICE and border officers take off their masks. Republican Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri also repeating the lie that ICE and border agents would be putting their lives at risk if they had to show their faces to the public. He said, quote, requiring that officers remove their masks and identify themselves during operations is a clear and obvious attempt to intimidate and put our federal agents in harm's way. So I've prepared an entire episode on how dangerous it actually is to be an ICE agent, but so much keeps happening, I don't have time to get to it. Adam Serwer writes for The Atlantic magazine. He's a fantastic columnist, and he just came out with a new piece entitled The Real Reason ICE Agents Wear Masks. So until I can do my show on how dangerous it is to be an ICE agent, let me just read from The Atlantic. This is by the great Adam Serwer. Ordinary police officers do not wear masks except in extremely rare and specific circumstances. This is the case even though statistically, regular police officers are at far greater risks than immigration agents. According to an analysis by Alex Norswatch at the Cato Institute based on data from last year, quote, law enforcement officers who don't work at ICE or Border Patrol have a death rate 6.3 times higher than that of immigration enforcement officers. In fact, the report found immigration agents are at no greater risk than regular people. Quote, the chance of an ICE or Border Patrol agent being murdered in the line of duty is about 1 in 94,549 per year, about 5.5 times less likely than a civilian being murdered. On my next show, I will show you some statistics that show border agents are more likely to commit a crime, especially a violent one, than immigrants. Bloomberg reporting late Wednesday night that Pennsylvania House Republican Brian Fitzpatrick, who represents a purple district, now saying he would support Democratic proposals to rein in ICE. Fitzpatrick is a former FBI agent. He's telling Bloomberg, quote, "They need body cameras. They need to remove masks. They need proper training. They need to be conducting operations that are consistent with their mission." So why is Congressman, Republican Brian Fitzpatrick talking this way? Well, he's an FBI agent, but he also represents Pennsylvania's 1st congressional district in the northern suburbs of Philadelphia. Kamala Harris, who lost Pennsylvania in 2024, carried Congressman Fitzpatrick's district by 0.3%. So there was ticket splitting. Republicans, or at least voters, cast their ballot for the Republican, Congressman Fitzpatrick, and Kamala Harris. So he's going to be, he knows he's out the door if this is a wave election come November. And we have a lot of Republicans who are running scared. Axios out with a story this morning about a warning from Republican Senator Tim Scott, who chairs the National Republican Senatorial Committee. That's the big fundraising arm that the party deploys to keep control of the Senate. Well, on Tuesday, Senator Tim Scott met privately with Senate Republicans, telling them they are all facing major headwinds going into the midterms. He said specifically that Maine Republican Senator Susan Collins is the most vulnerable in her attempt to seek a 6th term. Now, because Maine's other Senator Angus King and Vermont's Senator Bernie Sanders are independents, but they caucus with the Democrats in the Senate, right now the Republicans have a 53-47 majority in the Senate. Plus, Vice President J.D. Vance comes in to break ties. That means to gain control of the Senate with Donald Trump as president, Democrats in November must win 4 seats. Senator Scott is apparently looking at the same polling I talked about on the last show, but he gets better polls than I do. According to Axios, Senator Scott's numbers show Republicans losing to Democrats by 6 points in a generic congressional poll. That's what I told you on the last show. Now, I've seen several polls showing Democrats leading Republicans by 6 points in a generic congressional poll. As Howie Klein always tells us, because of structural advantages that the Republicans have and because of gerrymandering, Democrats are not going to be the beneficiary of a blue wave unless they lead by more than 3 percentage points in these generic congressional ballot polls. As always, it's about voter turnout. It's generally agreed that if the election were held today, if the midterms were held today, Democrats would most certainly win control of the House of Representatives, and the Senate, well, that's still a long shot. But the fact that Tim Scott, chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, is putting his party on notice, it suggests the midterms, well, it could be a massive red wave of blood for the GOP, a bloodbath. We are seeing the Republican Party raising more money than the Democrats right now, bigger war chest, but that will change as we get closer to November. The Associated Press reporting that the Supreme Court is not going to rule against California's redistricting plan to carve out 5 reliably new blue congressional districts that would cancel out the 5 reliably red congressional districts carved out in Texas. You might remember last November, California voters overwhelmingly approved Prop 50, which gives the governor of California and the state legislature, all Democrats, gives them temporary authority to redraw congressional maps and eliminate reliably red districts, turning them into safe blue ones. Republicans sued, took it to the Supreme Court, claiming Democrats were planning to gerrymander, to redraw the maps based on race, not by party. The Supreme Court rejected that argument. The maps can be reconfigured. The Supreme Court, in a recent ruling, said it has no problem with what is called partisan gerrymandering, meaning they would leave it up to individual state Supreme Courts to decide on the constitutionality of state legislatures drawing maps that favor one party over the other. The Supreme Court said it would intervene, however, if the gerrymandering was conducted along racial lines to dilute the vote of a district comprised primarily of people of color. So the Roberts Court said it's okay to redraw maps to give Republicans or Democrats an advantage. That's okay. That's called partisan gerrymandering. But if you're redrawing maps to dilute the voting power of people of color, the Supreme Court, will intervene. So what they do in Texas is they take a district with a large black population, which they know is going to vote for a Democrat, and they carve it up. They dilute the black and the Latino population, drawing new congressional districts, and they sprinkle the black and Hispanic residents into 3, sometimes 4 separate congressional districts to dilute the power of the black and Latino vote. There were memos written by Dillon, who heads the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. She wrote these last year to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, instructing him on how to gerrymander along racial, not partisan lines. But the Supreme Court upheld these Texas maps, even though it was a lower court ruled it was racial gerrymandering. So why is racial gerrymandering not permitted? There are provisions inside the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It orders states, especially in the old Confederacy, to preserve and foster what are called minority-majority congressional districts. A minority-majority congressional district is one where the majority of the voters are members of a minority group. That's a minority-majority congressional district. Maxine Waters, who used to be my congresswoman, represents South Central. That's a minority-majority congressional district. Most of the people who live in Maxine Waters' congressional district are minorities. Now, that's a provision from the 1965 Voting Rights Act. There is currently a case before the Supreme Court involving a minority-majority congressional district in Louisiana. This case was brought by white voters. I won't call them white supremacists. I'll just call them white voters who want the Supreme Court, to eliminate the provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1965 that preserves and fosters minority-majority congressional districts. These white plaintiffs argued before the Supreme Court last year that this provision inside the Civil Rights Act of 1965 has outlived its usefulness because we now live in a post-racial society. That's their argument. And they say holding on to artifacts from the civil rights movement only punishes white people. We're a post-racial society. That's why Trump's president. So all of us are familiar, I assume, with the term gerrymandering. That's where state legislatures redraw congressional maps to favor their party. Now, I want to make sure that I'm not getting ahead of myself here. I don't want to get your hopes up. But there is the distinct possibility that come November, a new word will enter our lexicon. It is a word only whispered among frightened Republicans right now, and that word is dummy mandering. That is an actual word that Republicans are using out of fear. Dummy mandering. If the Republicans take a pounding, especially in a place like Texas, where they rewrote the maps, Republicans are quietly admitting if they lose the House, it will be because of dummy mandering, which is basically stupid gerrymandering. What they did is dilute blue districts, hoping to turn them red, but in so doing, when you dummy mander, you end up stretching the red vote too thin as well, and you inadvertently turn what you thought was a reliably new red congressional district into a purple, possibly a blue district, especially if it's a wave election for the Democrats. So hopefully after the midterms, we're all going to be familiar with the word dummy mandering. I'm not going to paint a rosy picture for you because roses are red. But I'm also not going to paint a violet-y picture. Violets are blue. I don't know. I don't trust the American voter to do the right thing anymore, especially when Trump succeeds in scaring them and making them dumber than they already are. But it would appear, from where I'm sitting, that Trump's violent, uncare, fascistic immigration enforcement policy, besides being illegal and unconstitutional, is also turning into a major political liability for Republicans. Earlier, I told you Quinnipiac is out with a poll showing half the people living in our country know someone who's terrified of getting arrested by ICE. This Quinnipiac poll also shows 58% of Americans want Department of Homeland Security Chief Kristi Noem fired. Now, Trump despises Noem. He's keeping her around to do what he does best, humiliate and torture women, and also make sure her 2028 presidential ambitions are completely thwarted. He's turned her into the political face of his cruel border policy. 61% of Americans say they believe the Trump administration, this is according to the Quinnipiac poll, 61% of Americans say they believe the Trump administration pretty much lied about Alex Preddy, the way he was killed and who he is and was, and 61% say the administration is just lying about Alex Preddy. He's the ICU nurse, VA hospital nurse, who was executed because he was filming border agents. In the immediate aftermath of his execution, Kristi Noem labeled him a domestic terrorist who was intent on killing border agents. Stephen Miller labeled him an assassin, and then video emerged. And then the body cam footage was played internally. Only Trump has said he didn't believe Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse inside the VA. Only Trump has said Preddy wasn't an assassin. Nobody has taken back the slanderous and libelous things they said about Alex Preddy, including Vice President J.D. Vance, who immediately after Preddy's execution, our vice president reposted on social media statements by the odious Stephen Miller, statements that called Alex Preddy, quote, an assassin with ill intent who tried to murder federal agents. Newsweek now reporting that Vice President J.D. Vance gave an interview to the Daily Mail where Vance was asked if he'd like to apologize to Alex Preddy's family or at least take back his support for Stephen Miller's characterization of Alex Preddy. J.D. Vance said, apologize for what? Vance then repeated what he said right after the shooting, that Preddy was a guy who showed up with ill intent to an ICE protest, unquote. Actually, it was Border Patrol officers who executed Alex Preddy, not ICE agents. Vance said those agents who killed Preddy enjoy the presumption of innocence until they are found guilty in a court of law. He said, that's the way we do it here in the United States. Wow. J.D. Vance, he went to Yale Law School. He's so smart. The presumption of innocence. And what about Alex Preddy? Does he too enjoy the presumption of innocence? Or is the vice president free to taint future jury pools who could conceivably rule on whether or not these border agents murdered Preddy? Is that what J.D. Vance is attempting to do? Taint jury pools by holding fast and still accusing Alex Preddy of being an assassin despite all evidence to the contrary? Yale Law School graduate, aren't you glad the Supreme Court got rid of affirmative action so racist redneck hillbillies like J.D. Vance wouldn't lose their richly deserved spot inside America's elite universities? Because it would be a tragedy if a great legal mind like J.D. Vance were deprived a Yale Law School education in order to make room for a far less deserving person of color, because J.D. Vance is so smart. Actually, sarcasm and contempt for J.D. Vance aside, he should be disbarred, and Yale Law School should take back the diploma. Government officials, especially inside the executive branch, have to be very careful what they say about cases before the courts. Countless times in the past year, Kristi Noem has been admonished by judges to stop describing immigrants who have just been arrested as, quote, domestic terrorists, because it weakens the government's case. It makes it easier for the defendant, like Abrego Garcia, to claim they can't get a fair trial. Now, Kristi Noem is a moron. So is J.D. Vance, but he wears his Yale Law School diploma on his sleeve. He's supposed to know better. Trump's original travel ban, for example, was back in 2017. This is why J.D. Vance is so stupid. So Trump's original travel ban, the Muslim ban, was issued by an executive order back in 2017. It was one of the first things he did. And it was overturned specifically because of what Trump said in the lead up to signing his executive order banning Muslim immigrants from entering our country. The courts ruled back in 2017 that Trump's executive order to ban Muslims from entering the country was based on, quote, religious animus, hatred for Muslims, unquote. And the courts based their conclusion on what? On the things Trump said about Islam while he was both a candidate for president and then a president. If you are the vice president of the United States and you have a degree from Yale Law School, J.D. Vance, you should know to keep your stupid hillbilly mouth shut. On Monday, for example, U.S. District Judge Anna C. Reyes of the District of Columbia issued an 83-page ruling blocking Trump's decision to revoke temporary protected status for 350,000 Haitian immigrants. These are 350,000 Haitian immigrants fleeing poverty, cholera, earthquakes, and political upheaval. They were first given temporary protected status by Obama after the 2010 earthquake, and then it's been renewed, but it's temporary. Trump tried to revoke their temporary protected status. During his first term, the courts blocked it, and he's trying to do it again. So the judge this week blocked his executive order. She blocked it on Monday. So he wrote an executive order lifting temporary protective status for Haitian immigrants, which meant it would be open season on Haitians here in America, especially in Springfield, Ohio. I'll get to that in a second. Once he lifts the protected status, ICE agents would be rounding up Haitians or just people who look or sound Haitian. But Judge Reyes on Monday blocked the order by Trump, citing racial animus. This is the same thing that happened with his Muslim ban. Judge Reyes blocked Trump's order to begin deporting Haitians. She said it was motivated by hostility to non-white immigrants. She then provided a list of statements made by Donald Trump about Haitians, as well as statements made by our vice president about Haitians to prove that lifting temporary protected status for Haitians is rooted in racial animus, or to put it more succinctly, racism, hatred for non-whites. She mentioned Donald Trump calling Haiti an S-hole. I'm not going to use the word. He called it an S-hole country during a 2018 Oval Office meeting. He told donors, why can't we get immigrants from nice countries? Why do we have to get immigrants from Haiti? Why can't we get them from nice countries like Denmark and Finland, white people? She mentioned that he said Haitians all have AIDS and letting them in is, quote, like a death wish for our country. And then she mentioned a lie, first amplified, she said, by Vice President J.D. Vance, and then picked up on by Donald Trump during the 2024 presidential election, where both men claimed Haitian immigrants living in Springfield, Ohio, were eating their neighbors' pets. Remember that? J.D. Vance was cited in the ruling. Now think about this. He has a degree from Yale Law School. And he should have known about why the Muslim ban was overturned, right? So J.D. Vance was cited in this ruling. His lies, according to the judge, proved that Trump's decision to lift temporary protected status for Haitians was motivated by both Trump's and J.D. Vance's, quote, capricious and arbitrary bias against people of color, unquote. Racism. They're racists. Now, in our courts, what you say in the lead up to a crime or in the lead up to signing an executive order can be used against you in order to reveal your intent. J.D. Vance should have known that. He went to Yale Law School. He knew that Trump tried to revoke temporary protective status for Haitians during the first term, and that got rejected. J.D. Vance knew in 2024 Trump was going to try to do it again, and he knew Trump's Muslim ban was overturned because of what Trump said about Islam. So if you're planning to revoke temporary protective status for Haitians, JD, you don't spend the last 60 days of a presidential campaign spreading lies about Haitians eating people's pets. It undercuts your own case for deporting Haitians. Now, you might remember he wouldn't stop spreading lies that Haitians here with temporary protected status, especially the ones in Springfield, Ohio, he wouldn't stop. And then death threats started pouring in to Haitians living in Springfield. Death threats to the Republican business owners who were hiring these Haitians to work for them became so intense, Springfield had to bring in state troopers to protect their schools and municipal buildings from Trump supporters threatening to kill the Haitian students in the schools and just to kill anybody who works for Springfield, Ohio's government because they're welcoming Haitian immigrants. And it got so bad, the governor, DeWine of Ohio, Republican, asked J.D. Vance to stop spreading these lies. He wouldn't do it. It got so bad. Finally, he caved. And he admitted he was lying about the Haitians. He said, yes, Haitians are not eating pets. He went on Dana Bash's State of the Union, CNN, and was asked, would you like to apologize the same way he was asked yesterday by the Daily Mail? Would you like to apologize for what you said about Alex Preddy? Never apologize. Never apologize. This is what J.D. Vance told CNN's Dana Bash in the lead up to the 2024 election. I think it was in the middle of September of 2024. He said, I'm not apologizing for telling lies about Haitian immigrants eating pets. I'm not apologizing for the death threats that came their way because of my lies. He said, quote, if I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. Breathtaking. Breathtaking. You're looking at Junior Pena. He's a right-wing Brazilian living in America. He has close to 500,000 followers on Instagram. He's got a huge following on YouTube and Facebook. He is MAGA. He's an immigrant who believes Trump's hardline stance against people who come to this country, who he says don't play by the rules. He says Trump is justified in cracking down on immigrants who don't play by the rules. He assured Brazilians who follow him, he's a Brazilian immigrant, not a citizen, he says Trump is only rounding up crooks and that ICE is being very careful not to target law-abiding immigrants. Junior Pena had a court appearance scheduled so he could update his immigration status, and for some reason, he didn't show up. So that happens, right? He's now being held in the for-profit Delaney Hall ICE detention facility in Newark, New Jersey. Delaney Hall, that's where my sister protests. It's run by Geo Group, one of America's largest operators of for-profit prisons. A GoFundMe page has been set up to cover Junior Pena's legal expenses. 10-year-old Elizabeth Zuna Casaguano and her mother have been sent back to Minneapolis after being held in an ICE detention facility in Texas for a month. She's now the fifth student attending Columbia Heights, Minnesota's public schools, taken into custody by ICE. 5-year-old Liam Ramos, who attends the same school, was taken in mid-January along with his father. They were finally released over the weekend. Both were held inside the Dilley Detention Center in Texas, which is now in lockdown due to a measles outbreak. Thank you, Bobby Kennedy Jr. Julie Lee was an attorney for the Department of Homeland Security, arguing on behalf of the United States government before a federal judge in Minneapolis, St. Paul. She was defending ICE and Border Patrol's failure to comply with that judge's court order to bring detainees before him for habeas corpus hearings. Julie Lee, this attorney, she'd been assigned 91 immigration cases in a month, all defending the United States government against habeas corpus challenges. In other words, ICE or Border Patrol grab somebody like 5-year-old Liam Ramos, and they won't release him, and they get a lawyer who wants a habeas corpus hearing. She was assigned 91 immigration cases in a month. Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's huge, right? And she finally broke down and said the following on Tuesday to the judge, quote, "The system sucks. This job sucks. I wish you could hold me in contempt so that I could get 24 hours of sleep. What do you want me to do? I am trying every breath that I have so that I can get you what you need," unquote. Then Julie Lee also pointed out that she's a person of color and her family is being threatened by the Department of Homeland Security. So she asked, "What do you want me to do?" "I don't know." "How about not take the assignment which you volunteered for?" On Wednesday, the Department of Justice announced she would no longer, Julie Lee, who identifies as a person of color, she would no longer be handling cases for the Department of Homeland Security. If you're a person of color, why would you be defending Operation Metro Surge? Why would you do that? Are you supposed to get, and she tried to get sympathy from the judge because she said members of her family are being threatened by Border Patrol. Border Czar Tom Homan? Oh, Homan. I knew that was spelled incorrectly. Tom Homan, not human. He's not a human. Tom Homan. Tom Homan announced he is removing 700 federal agents from Minnesota. That leaves about 2,000 still there. He seemed to be hinting that they will be winding down Operation Metro Surge, but they're all liars. Minneapolis Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, both Democrats, called Tom Homan's announcement, quote, a step in the right direction, but they said there is still a very heavy federal presence in their state. Get out. Leave, they said. Kristi Noem, our beleaguered head of Homeland Security, announced in light of the two tragedies, well, there are more than two, in Minnesota, and she didn't call them tragedies, but she is ordering all border and ICE agents in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and St. Paul, all the agents involved in Operation Metro Surge in Minnesota to wear body cams. Democrats want the body cams to be mandatory for all ICE agents around the country and not used when Kristi Noem decides they should be used in select locations. In the original Department of Homeland Security budget for 2026, Noem and the Republicans wanted to slash funding for body cams. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly known as Prince Andrew, was awakened in the middle of the night early Tuesday and told, get out of here. He was evicted from the Royal Lodge, the 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate. It was given to him by his mother, Queen Elizabeth. You know, he was her favorite. He was her favorite. Stripped of all his titles last August due to his associations with Jeffrey Epstein, brother King Charles has been trying to evict Andrew from the Royal Lodge for more than a year. It is generally believed that new revelations that came out this week, where Andrew was accused of paying strippers in West Palm Beach, Florida, while visiting Jeffrey Epstein. He paid them to engage in a threesome at a party where 14-year-old girls might have been in attendance. It is believed those specific allegations just coming out seemed to be the tipping point for King Charles to send in the moving van, which arrived in the middle of the night, and throw Andrew out of the Royal Lodge. These are the moving vans. That is the Royal Lodge. It's not bad. That's where he was living. It's a 30-room mansion. I think the Queen Mother used to live there, and then when she died, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's daughter, gave that mansion to Andrew to live in for the rest of his life. Sarah Ferguson, his ex-wife, was also living there, but she's moved out. Supposedly she's couch surfing, and I think she's moving to Oxfordshire, moving in with one of her daughters. And these are the moving vans coming in the middle of the night or early morning to get rid of his stuff. It is generally believed Andrew was taken to Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, which is where the royal family spends Christmas. He's living in the home where his father lived during his brief retirement. Prince Philip lived in this little 5-room house on the Sandringham estate for the final 2 years of his life before he died. Andrew is expected eventually to move into Marsh Farm, which is also located on the Sandringham estate. And yes, I follow this the way some people follow the Super Bowl. I'm fascinated by the royal family. This is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. Share it. Please get the word out. Okay. Lot to go over. I'm not even close to finished. So here we go. The government is back open. The partial shutdown that began early Saturday morning came to an end Tuesday after Donald Trump signed a $1.2 trillion spending package that covers everything for the rest of fiscal year 2026, everything that is except for the Department of Homeland Security, which will remain funded for fewer than 2 weeks as part of this new deal. They get fewer than 2 weeks. They have until February 13th for Republicans and Democrats to figure out what kind of civil liberty guardrails can be injected into what appears to be a $64.5 billion spending bill for the Department of Homeland Security. $10 billion of that goes towards ICE. The House passed the slimmed-down spending package on Tuesday, with the final vote coming in at 217 in favor, 214 against. All it took was 2 votes for this bill. And all it's going to take pretty much is 2 votes to die along party lines in the House of Representatives. That's just how slim the the Republican margin is. What I mean is if Democrats can flip 2 Republican votes to come vote with the Democrats, nothing Mike Johnson wants to pass in the House will get passed. So what we saw on Tuesday was 21 House Democrats bucking their leadership and voting for the bill, despite House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries telling them not to. We saw a suspiciously equal number of Republicans in the House, 21, bucking their House leadership by voting against the bill. Well, that's an equal number of party defectors, right? 21 on each side. The final vote of 217 for and 214 against remains an accurate representation of just how slim the Republican majority is when there's a vote strictly along party lines. When you have a vote where nobody would dare challenge their respective leadership, a vote on, say, impeaching Kristi Noem or electing a new speaker to gain control of the House, 2 votes, 217 to 214, all it takes is 2 votes. It's simple addition and subtraction. It confuses some people. So look, the final vote on Tuesday's bill was 217 to 214. On a future bill, let's say we have 2 Republican defectors, then that 217 Republican majority drops down to 215, and the 214 Democratic minority gets bumped up to 216, giving Democrats a 1-vote majority, 216 to 214. If 2 Republicans switch sides, that's a lot of power each Republican in the House has, and it's why Trump literally has to threaten their lives to move his agenda. The spending bill passed in the House, and remember, this is the package that came out of the Senate last Friday. It was the grand bargain, stripping Homeland Security from an appropriations minibus that included 5 instead of 6 spending bills. Those 5 appropriations bills passed in the Senate Friday, and they passed Tuesday in the House, signed into law by Trump, all on Tuesday. Those 5 bills cover defense, the State Department, Labor Department, and the Department of Education. The entire federal budget is comprised of 12 separate appropriations bills. Right now, they've passed 11. 3 were passed when they reopened the government in November with that continuing resolution. An additional 3 appropriations bills were signed in mid-January. I believe it was January 22nd. And that left 6 more appropriations bills that needed to be signed into law. The House on Tuesday voted to pass 5. That came from the Senate. All that's left now is the Department of Homeland Security's funding bill, which means roughly 78% of the government's day-to-day operations are funded throughout fiscal year 2026, with the remaining 22% all contained inside this hotly contested Homeland Security spending bill, which Congress has until February 13th to sort out. Otherwise, what? Theoretically, funding for the Department of Homeland Security runs out? Well, no, because thanks to one big, beautiful bill passed in July, now that's a supplemental, which means it's in addition to the annual budget. It's a supplement to the budget, a supplemental. Thanks to one big, beautiful bill, which was a supplemental, the Department of Homeland Security has an additional, let's say, $200 billion over the next 4 years that it can draw from should the February 13th deadline come without a Homeland Security appropriations bill for 2026 agreed upon. The Democrats lost most of their leverage when it comes to reining in ICE and Border Patrol after Tuesday's minibus was signed into law, because there's not much of a government shutdown they can threaten Trump with should Republicans not meet their demands on the Homeland Security funding bill. That's why Hakeem Jeffries voted against the minibus on Tuesday. He wanted to hold the entire 5 bills package hostage in order to rein in ICE. As I said, Congress has fewer. God, this is fascinating. This is better than sports. I wish people followed this. It's like this is so much more important than the Super Bowl. So Congress has fewer than 2 weeks, 8 days, basically, to figure out how they want to fund Homeland Security. If there's no funding bill, practically all of Homeland Security employees are considered essential workers, meaning they don't get furloughed, meaning they have to keep showing up to work, and they don't get paid until Congress finally agrees on this contentious Homeland Security funding bill, which means they're all putting things on credit, and they'll be paid eventually for the work they're doing now. But if they're living paycheck to paycheck, everything's going on a credit card. This is right now, this is the most important debate we've had in our country in years. What kind of America do we want? What kind of power do we want to hand over to poorly trained and incompetent, murderous ICE and border agents? With crime at record lows, are we willing to sacrifice our civil liberties so Donald Trump can persecute and prosecute his imaginary enemies? Well, attaching amendments to spending bills, in other words, or conditions upon which ICE and Border Patrol will get their funding, it makes this appropriations bill what they call dirty. That's an actual term they use. It's now a dirty bill. It's not clean. It makes it very hard for ordinary citizens to keep track of what's going on in Congress when they keep passing what are called dirty bills, and that's why they dirty them up, to confuse us. ICE and Border Patrol should be forced to wear body cams. They should be ordered to take off their masks, to wear their badges, their identity numbers, where they can be seen. They should be forced to use judicial, not administrative warrants to kick down the door of your home or to drag someone out of their car and arrest them. ICE and Border Patrol agents should be subject to the same training and standards as all other law enforcement agencies. And that, what I just said, should be codified into a separate law passed by Congress, signed by our president. It shouldn't be snuck into a funding bill that expires at the end of our fiscal year. What we're witnessing right now is legislative prestidigitation designed to allow members of Congress to vote for or against something without ever leaving behind a paper trail their constituents can then hold them accountable for. By sneaking issues of civil liberties into a spending package, it gives both parties cover to tell constituents, well, I'm surprised you were able to figure this out. It's complicated, but I voted for this spending bill, because while I disagree with the way ICE is conducting operations in Minnesota and Chicago and Los Angeles, I just didn't think it would be fair to shut the entire government down over civil liberties. That's why these are called dirty bills, tying American values, how law enforcement behaves, tying that to a spending bill confuses ordinary voters. The media can't possibly explain it. And more importantly, even if they do inject civil liberty guardrails into the spending bill, it only applies to fiscal year 2026, which means we have to go back to square one on civil liberties when we have to figure out how to fund the Department of Homeland Security for fiscal year 2027. These are dirty, dirty bills. And what that does, when you only pass dirty bills, it gives way more power to the Supreme Court and the president. Without explicit laws stating all law enforcement must wear body cams, where they can't wear masks, they must wear their identification fully displayed, they can't rely on administrative warrants, they must make arrests based on judicial warrants. When you slip it into a spending bill that only lasts for fiscal year 2026, it creates a hash of lower court rulings that get overturned by appellate courts, with a president picking and choosing which judges' decisions to obey. It's why right now, we have a federal judge in Portland saying ICE can't use tear gas indiscriminately on protesters, but they can in Chicago and Minnesota because appellate courts overturned a lower court ruling similar to the one that just came down from Portland. That's where it stands right now, because Congress will not pass a law defending our civil liberties. Where it stands right now, ICE has a separate court order in Portland, Oregon, completely, and they have to obey that, but it's completely different in Minnesota and Chicago because Congress hasn't passed laws dictating what ICE can and can't do. And like I said, even if the Democrats' civil rights guardrails make it into the spending bill, it only applies to fiscal year 2026. We are a nation that is ungovernable because Congress refuses to do the people's business. Now, we have a system in place, we have a constitution that breeds this chaos, and perhaps this chaos may be our only saving grace. It may be the chaos that prevents a madman like Trump from taking over and forcing us all to march in lockstep. Maybe our greatest virtue is we just hate each other, and that prevents us from turning into Nazi Germany, which we're more likely, if you want to know where we're heading, look at Chile, Brazil, and Argentina in the 70s. That's where you should be looking, not Nazi Germany. That's where it's heading unless we do something. Meanwhile, the New Republic reporting that newly hired ICE agents were promised massive signing bonuses, but so far those bonuses have yet to get paid. Thanks to one big, beautiful bill, that's the supplemental that was passed and signed into law on July 4th of last year, ICE was given $75 billion to hire more agents over the next 4 years, even though border crossings are at the lowest they've been since the 1970s. ICE has already doubled the number of agents in little under a year. They have a force of roughly 22,000, and the new agents were promised $50,000 signing bonuses and as much as $60,000 in student loan forgiveness. I think his name is Al. I think that's the guy who needs student loan forgiveness, Al. Some new ICE recruits are complaining the bonuses have not been paid, while others are learning that the bonuses come in yearly installments. So instead of getting a lump sum of $50,000, they're only getting $10,000 a year over the next 5 years. And others are complaining the health care coverage for their families that they were promised hasn't kicked in yet. Well, we would probably have had the entire 2026 budget passed and signed into law by now. But Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis-St. Paul turned into an absolute disaster for local residents, especially Renee Good, Alex Preddy, and their families. Their deaths, along with a barrage of videos showing ICE and border agents beating up protesters, well, it's been an unmitigated political disaster for Republicans and the Department of Homeland Security. Where do we go from here? This is the most important debate we've had as a nation in years. In theory, most Americans and most politicians support the idea of law and order. In theory, most Americans and politicians and the media will give, in theory, law enforcement the benefit of the doubt, despite our founding fathers instructing us not to give law enforcement the benefit of the doubt. Our founding fathers were wary of law enforcement, which is why almost all of our 10 Bill of Rights are in some way reining in the power of law enforcement. If you read the Bill of Rights, most of that is making sure law enforcement doesn't violate our civil liberties. It is patriotic to distrust law enforcement. It's un-American to give blind faith to law enforcement because they are human beings with power. Never trust anybody with power. Our founding fathers got practically everything wrong, and I believe our servile obedience to their Constitution, a document that's 250 years old with only, 27 amendments? This servile they've only needed to change the Constitution 27 times. They only needed to amend it 27 times. This has left us ungovernable and ripe for an opportunistic infection with fascistic impulses like Donald Trump to come in and tear away at all the norms that filled in all the millions of missing pieces to our Constitution. There were norms that allowed us to function somewhat peacefully. Again, this country, nothing new is happening right now. It's happening to white people, okay? But none of this is new. So we're an ungovernable nation. And again, it might be this chaos that keeps Trump from being able to force us to march in lockstep. But again, let's not flatter ourselves into believing this country has ever put civil liberties ahead of property and the needs of the white ruling class. Nothing new here. Nothing new. All that being said, inscribed into our nation's DNA, thanks to our founding fathers, is this healthy distrust, if not downright contempt, for the powerful, especially for those in law enforcement. There's a reason we call law enforcement officers servants of the people. The choice of the word servant is important. It's meant to establish the pecking order where citizens enjoy not just the presumption of innocence, but also respect from law enforcement. If you can get past the videos of Renee Good's murder and Alex Pretty's execution, and if you just watch the day-to-day videos, the day-to-day interactions between ICE agents, border agents, and ordinary American citizens, what you see are border and ICE agents, mostly men, who chose law enforcement to get instead of give respect. And I think most Americans have a visceral reaction. I think we see these videos, and I think most of us, even Republicans, have contempt for Border Patrol and ICE agents who so clearly pursued a badge and a gun to satisfy their needs instead of ours. It doesn't sit well with most Americans until we're scared. That's the trick. If you can scare us, take my civil liberties. Most Americans are willing to surrender their civil liberties. They're willing to surrender the power dynamic between law enforcement and civilians, where we become servants to law enforcement. We are willing to surrender all of that when someone succeeds in scaring us. It's precisely what George W. Bush did after 9/11 to get the Patriot Act passed. And it's what Donald Trump is doing right now to get massive funding for his own police force made up entirely of ICE agents. You know, at least we had 9/11 to justify the Patriot Act. The only justification for turning ICE into the single most funded law enforcement agency in the world is Donald Trump's lie that we are being invaded by immigrants. There is no emergency. There's no border crossings at an all-time low. Crime is at an all-time low. We didn't have a 9/11 to justify this. All we have is a stupid citizenry that Donald Trump knows is easy to scare. Trump knows that time and again, Americans have proven themselves willing to sacrifice practically all their civil liberties if you can scare them first. Because Americans are children who want to believe law enforcement is mommy, it's daddy looking out for us. But this is why this debate is so important. When we actually, and thank you, Steve Jobs, for the cell phones, these videos. When we actually take a look at how law and order is implemented, right? So when we're scared, we like the idea of law and order. But then when we look at the videos, or when we're confronted personally by a border agent or an ICE agent or a police officer, we discover that those people with guns and badges protecting our property or actually stealing it along with our freedom. When we examine who the cops, who the prosecutors, the prison guards, the wardens, and the judges actually are, we discover way too many of these people chose a life in law enforcement because they're unsound, because they're morally and mentally defective, and they can't be trusted with a gun or our Constitution. I'm talking about this guy, Jonathan Ross, the alleged killer of Renee Good, all the way up to 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices. These are mental defectives who cannot be trusted. Yes, there is serious crime. There is violent crime. But those numbers are at secular lows. The murder rate in this country is the lowest it's been since 1900. We are not in an emergency to justify the militarization of law enforcement and the decimation of what's left of our civil liberties. How stupid a country could you possibly be to think Donald Trump would be justified in invoking the Insurrection Act, and you have a Supreme Court that just goes along with this? This is the most important debate we can have. Now, had it just been Renee Good getting killed by that ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, who allegedly muttered effing bitch as she lay dying, I believe the moderates in the Democratic Party, fearing they would be perceived as soft on law and order, I believe they would have voted to fund this year's Department of Homeland Security bill, and we'd have a finished budget. But it was the killing 2 weeks after Renee Good, the killing of Alex Preddy, that made it necessary for these so-called moderates in the Democratic Party and moderates in the Republican Party, members of Congress in purple districts, they had to admit that while, yes, law and order is a great idea in theory, but until we replace ICE and Border Patrol officers with robots programmed to obey and enforce the law instead of being slaves to the trauma induced by their parents' cruel and sadistic toilet training, well, we're going to need some civil liberty guardrails. We're going to need some civil liberty guardrails because I'm in a purple district and I could lose my seat. And yes, it's all about bad toilet training. These border agents, these ICE agents, they were traumatized as children, and they take it out on us, especially women. They take it out on women. The Democratic leadership in both chambers, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, have been very specific on what they want in the new Homeland Security spending bill. I think this is Schumer's and Jeffries' finest moment, or at least in at least a year. I think they've risen to the occasion. They're demanding no more masks, mandatory body cams, judicial, not administrative warrants. They also say they want state and local oversight of crimes committed by immigration enforcement officers because the Department of Justice won't look into it. You know how many ICE agents have been disciplined in the past year? 0. Now, they did open up a civil rights investigation into the execution of Alex Preddy. No civil rights investigation into the execution of Renee Good. Schumer and Jeffries are demanding these murders be turned over to the state of Minnesota because Pam Bondi would rather prosecute the victims. We know this. This is why so many FBI agents and federal prosecutors in Minneapolis quit, in Minneapolis, St. Paul. They were ordered to look into Renee Good's wife, Becca, to see if she was part of Antifa. So part of the demands that Schumer and Jeffries are making are that let Hennepin County in Minnesota prosecute the men who killed Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And again, administrative warrants versus judicial warrants. This is a deal breaker for Schumer and Jeffries. They say there can only be judicial warrants to kick open someone's door or drag somebody out of a car to arrest them. So a quick side note about Speaker Mike Johnson, this backwater hick who fancies himself a constitutional scholar. He calls himself a constitutional scholar, but only because he's a degenerate liar. He is a degenerate liar. On Tuesday, he dismissed Democratic demands for judicial instead of administrative warrants, saying the only difference between the two is administrative warrants are issued by immigration judges. That's a lie. That's a lie. He said an administrative warrant is as constitutional as a judicial warrant because they're both signed by a judge. That is a lie. Mike Johnson is a degenerate liar. It's a lie. All administrative warrants are issued by administrators. That's why they're called administrative warrants. If they were signed by a judge, they'd be called judicial warrants. All administrative warrants, every single one, is signed by an administrator, not a lawyer, not a judge, just some flunky who works inside the Department of Homeland Security, like Greg Bovino. That's, again, why they're called administrative and not judicial warrants. An administrator, not a judge, signs these warrants. This is the new Republican lie, and I caught it last week with Jim Jordan, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, another liar. I'm fine with administrative warrants. It's just a different type of judge signing off on them. No judge is signing these administrative warrants. ICE and Border Patrol right now are using warrants to kick open doors, to drag you out of your car. First of all, they're not even using warrants, but if you're lucky, they use administrative warrants signed by Department of Homeland Security administrators, not judges. But the lie that the Republicans are saying is, no, these are constitutional. They're signed. They're just as good as a judicial warrant. They're signed by immigration judges. It's an effing lie. It is an effing lie. Immigration judges are separate from regular judges. And by the way, immigration judges have nothing to do with administrative warrants. But I just want to tell you what an immigration judge is and why this is the height of hypocrisy for Republicans to suddenly sing the praises of immigration judges. Immigration judges are nested in the executive branch. They are not part of the judicial branch. 3 branches of government, right? Article 1, legislative branch. Article 2, the executive branch, the president. Article 3, judicial branch. Those are the judges, the Supreme Court. Administrative judges work for the executive branch. They are subject to Article 2 of the Constitution, not Article 3. They are not part of the judicial branch. which means they are subject to the whims of Attorney General Pam Bondi. They are appointed by Attorney General Pam Bondi. They are not appointed by the president. They are not confirmed by the Senate. They are immigration judges, are judges who work for and are hired by the Attorney General. Immigration judges are what are called inferior officers. That's not my term. Inferior officers who work for the Attorney General. They are inferiors. But more importantly, immigration judges, which we need more of, they do not sign off on any of these administrative warrants being used by ICE and Border Patrol to kick open your door or drag you out of your car. Because immigration judges are not part of the process. There is no process to go for Department of Homeland Security, for ICE agents to go before an immigration judge to have them sign a warrant. And even if they were part of the process, immigration judges don't have the time to hear the case for an administrative warrant. There are only 600 immigration judges. And that's why there's a backlog of about 4 million immigration and asylum cases. Immigration judges don't have time to sign off on an arrest or the search of a home. There aren't enough for them to get involved. They're not signing administrative warrants. Mike Johnson is a degenerate liar. More importantly, he and the rest of the MAGA Republicans in Washington despise immigration judges. This is why I get so upset when Jim Jordan and Mike Johnson are suddenly singing the praises of immigration judges, lying that, don't worry, these warrants are constitutional. We have immigration judges who can be trusted. Mike Johnson, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller hate immigration judges. Immigration judges are hindrances to Trump's and Stephen Miller's plan to deport at least 1 million immigrants a year. 1 million a year, 3,000 a day. Even though all of them are documented, they're in the country legally, they just can't go before a judge because there are only 600 immigration judges. The problem, as I said during the election, it's never been immigration. America, we have a population implosion. We need more people in this country to keep Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and this Ponzi scheme we call an economy growing. So this isn't about crime or protecting jobs. This is about race. This is about white Christian nationalists taking their country back, taking it back in a way that centralizes the power of the state into the Oval Office, the hands of a dictator wannabe like Donald Trump. This is about keeping America white and Christian and concentrating the powers of the executive branch. It's the unitary executive theory that Bill Barr and Project 2025 are big proponents of. The unitary executive, give all the power to the Oval Office. This is about concentrating powers inside the Oval Office so we can live in a police state that caters to what the right wing not so secretly calls legacy Americans. Legacy Americans, people who are white and Christian and can trace their roots back to the European Protestants who came to America before the Civil War. Everything else is a smokescreen. And yes, Stephen Miller's grandparents are Jewish refugees. Nobody said these people are consistent or smart. If you want to address the so-called immigration problem, the issue is we don't have enough immigration judges to process the millions of law-abiding people who want to become Americans or who want to live here with all the necessary documents. 600 immigration judges, there's a backlog of 4 million waiting to go before the judges. It's not their fault. So, to justify the annihilation of our Fourth and Eighth Amendment rights, people like Mike Johnson or Jim Jordan say, we have immigration judges to protect our civil liberties. The truth is, Mike Johnson, Jim Jordan, Trump, they want to get rid of all immigration judges. All of them. In one big, beautiful bill signed into law, this is unbelievable when I read this. One big, beautiful bill signed into law last July. In that bill, there is a hard cap of 800 immigration judges total. It means that we cannot hire more than 800 immigration judges. By all estimates, we need at the very least double or triple that number of immigration judges to process the backlog of close to 4 million people waiting to go before an immigration judge. But Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, Mike Johnson, they don't want to process these 4 million people. They want to put them in for-profit detention facilities or deport them. They want them to use them as cheap labor or deport them. By law, thanks to one big, beautiful bill, we can hire no more than 800 immigration judges, while at the same time, one big, beautiful bill is throwing close to $200 billion at ICE and border security and $40 billion at the for-profit detention center industry, with just 800 judges to oversee the sprawling network of deceit and corruption. They want to get rid of the immigration judges so nobody is looking over Geo Group's and CoreCivic's shoulders as they take in billions of your tax dollars, leaving immigrants to die, one meal a day, no medical attention. This is precisely how you create a police state, right? This is how you do it. Billions upon billions of dollars for ICE, border agents, for-profit detention centers, but zero money for immigration judges to monitor their behavior, to make sure due process is provided to the people getting arrested and the people behind bars. Most of these due process claims for immigrants now are going before federal, not immigration judges. There aren't enough immigration judges. And what does that do? Well, I told you about that DOJ attorney who broke down and started crying. They're clogging our courts with habeas corpus petitions on purpose. That's part of the plan, make it impossible for our judicial system to function. They want it to collapse under the weight of the law. Judges can't keep track of what is now allowable and what isn't. There's so many rulings coming down. The judge is right. We can't keep track of all the cases and the decisions, and they're being drowned in caseloads. That's the plan. Project 2025 was always about flooding the zone. Make it so nobody, even the people who interpret the law, can't remember what the law actually is. Democrats have made their demands for passage of this Homeland Security spending bill. Again, body cams on, masks off, easily identifiable badge numbers on all ICE and Border Patrol officers, and holding these agents to the same standards we hold all members of law enforcement. So what's the holdup? Republicans have their demands. For what? Passage of what Chuck Schumer calls Jim Crow 2.0, the SAVE Act. Again, this is how they're going to dirty up a spending bill. The SAVE Act is a separate bill, but Republicans, at least some, want to sneak the SAVE Act into a spending bill for Homeland Security and make it permanent. Why do they sneak the SAVE Act into a spending bill? Because they know the SAVE Act could never pass on its own merits. So you have to sneak it into a Homeland Security spending bill. You have to hold Homeland Security ransom in exchange for a vote in favor of the SAVE Act. Members of Congress can't vote for this horrible bill on its own. But if you sneak it into a spending bill for Homeland Security, members of Congress can justify voting for the SAVE Act. I had no choice. It was either that, or if I voted against it, funding for Homeland Security wouldn't pass, so my hands were tied. That's why they dirty up bills. So what is the SAVE Act? It would demand that nobody in the United States can vote without some sort of photo ID. And it's all under the guise of tackling a non-existent problem made up by Republicans in the service of many things, but right now, the Great Replacement Theory. What is the Great Replacement Theory? Democrats, specifically the Jews, are opening up the border so millions of undocumented, dark-skinned immigrants can pour in and vote for Democrats, and in so doing, replace white people. If you think I'm kidding, I'm not. It's something that you don't want to give any oxygen to because it's just so out there and stupid and repugnant. But if you get one or two drinks into a MAGA Republican, after he's done making a pass at the other men in the room, that MAGA Republican will tell you that there is an actual plan to replace white people, to make them second-class citizens, and it's being masterminded by the Jews. This Great Replacement Theory is not limited to America. It comes out of Europe. The Great Replacement Theory comes from Europe and Russia. It's why Alternative for Germany scored second in last year's parliamentary elections. Elon Musk, big supporter of Alternative for Germany. J.D. Vance, big supporter of Alternative for Germany. Doesn't matter that there isn't a single shred of evidence to support any of this theory. It is and remains the foundational myth behind passage of the SAVE Act, which they claim, I think Chip Roy introduced this, it isn't about voter integrity. It's not about clean elections. It's about cleaning our nation's blood and soil by suppressing the vote of people of color. By requiring photo ID, you make it harder for reliably Democratic voters to cast their ballots. Reliably Democratic voters, of course, are people of color. If you're old, if you're poor, if you're sleeping on somebody's couch, if you don't own or rent, it's almost impossible to prove your place of residence with or without a photo ID. That means you can't vote. If the SAVE Act passes, you can't vote. In Trump's world, people who couch surf, people who are homeless, live in their car, people who don't have a car or a driver's license or a passport, they shouldn't be allowed to vote. They believe that. They don't believe everybody should vote. This isn't about making certain only citizens vote. This is about making it harder for certain citizens to vote. Black people, Latinos, poor people. And it goes back to Karl Rove and George W. Bush at the beginning of this century. They were the ones who started all this by perpetuating the lie of voter fraud, non-existent voter fraud. They forced the Department of Justice to prosecute non-existent voter fraud in order to convince enough people we need to pass laws that will suppress the Democratic vote. If the SAVE Act ever became law, ordinary citizens would have to produce a birth certificate. Do you know where your birth certificate is? Do you even know how to get your birth certificate? You'd have to produce a passport. Do you have a passport? Poor people don't have passports. Or you're going to have to produce a real ID compliant document in order to register to vote. If you look at Florida, you know how hard DeSantis has made it for people of color or poor people to get the proper documentation to vote. The SAVE Act would outlaw registering to vote by mail or online. You'd have to go in person to register to vote. Chuck Schumer calls the SAVE Act more than just an abomination. He calls it Jim Crow 2.0. Why Jim Crow 2.0? Because when Reconstruction ended, we saw in the late 1870s and early 1880s the emergence of Jim Crow laws in the South, making it impossible for freed slaves to vote. During Reconstruction, this was in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, the black vote, we're talking freed slaves, in the South, the black vote got as high as 90% in some parts of the South. By the early 1890s, thanks to Jim Crow and the ensuing voter suppression, the black vote in the South plummeted to 6%. So, how do you pass laws to keep freed slaves from voting? Poll taxes. You charge $1 or $2 to vote. That was a week's salary for a sharecropper, a job traditionally held by freed slaves who wanted to vote. You implement arbitrary literacy tests, randomly asking black voters, and only black voters, obscure questions about our Constitution, questions nobody could answer, even the people asking the questions. And those questions were only asked at the discretion of white election supervisors. You pass laws that grandfather in the right to vote. If your grandparents had the right to vote, i.e. they weren't slaves, then you don't have to pay a poll tax. or pass the literacy test. And it's legal, or at least it was legal for more than 100 years until the Supreme Court began to step in, and then we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Voting Rights Act of 1965. The Civil War ended in 1865. We freed the slaves. It took 100 years for Congress to vote to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1865. So, state by state, state by southern state, by the early 1880s, the white politicians, mostly Democrat, different party back then, they figured out a way to cut the black vote all the way down to 6%. It was 90% during Reconstruction. Jim Crow laws passed. Black vote in the South was down to 6%. And if black people don't vote or can't vote, our government doesn't have to pay any attention to them. The story of the modern civil rights movement going back to the 1950s has been about guaranteeing black people the right to vote. Yes, it was about being served at the counter at Woolworths, not being forced to give up your seat on the bus to a white person. It was about equal opportunity, an end to housing and jobs discrimination, and making sure predominantly black schools have the same resources as anybody else's. But I think at the core, and leave a comment if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right, I believe at the core of the civil rights movement was guaranteeing black people the right to vote. Because Dr. King and a lot of others who he worked with knew that voting is the embodiment of nonviolent resistance. Voting is ultimately how you make your voice heard. It doesn't matter how many people take to the streets. It doesn't matter how many of us turn out on No King's Day. All that matters is how many of us vote on Election Day. Protests are incredibly important, but they don't accomplish anything unless those protests translate into votes. What has always scared white politicians like Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, what's always scared them is the idea of black people voting. Because black people voting means black people serve in the House of Representatives, the Senate, and on the Supreme Court. Black people voting means black people help write and interpret the law. And who has a problem with that? People who think this is my country, not theirs. The white Christian nationalists who have taken over the Republican Party, people like Mike Johnson, Donald Trump, Stephen Miller, whose grandparents were Jewish refugees, like I said, these are stupid people, can't expect any consistency from mental defectives. These are not sound minds. They will tell you, I'm not prejudiced. I don't have a problem with black people or non-Christians or Jews or Muslims or immigrants. You're all welcome to live here. You just need to watch yourself because this is not your country. It's mine. Now, I know it's hard for most of you to get your head wrapped around this, unless you're black or Latino. You get it. But if you're a white liberal, even a white leftist, people don't really believe. Yeah, they do. They do. They believe white Christians are what are called heritage Americans. I know. But this is what they believe. It's what Tucker Carlson, J.D. Vance, Charlie Kirk, and our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, honestly believe. They are heritage Americans. It's why people like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for governor in Ohio as a Republican, he's Indian heritage, and J.D. Vance's wife, Indian heritage. They're running up against so much hostility from people in their party. The resistance they face, even though they're Republicans. Vivek Ramaswamy says, I have conservative values. And MAGA world is going, we don't care, you're not white. He's Hindu. Another problem. The resistance these people face is they're told, you can live here. You're welcome to live here in the United States. We have nothing against you, but you got to behave. Don't get any ideas into your head that you own this country. You're a visitor. We have no problem with you. But just remember, you're not a real American. A real American. It's a term used by the same people who call themselves heritage Americans. Now, most of you are too busy to give this any credence because it's just so it's reactionary. You think we've evolved past this. Why would anyone take pride in the fact that they can trace their ancestry back several generations? Well, tribalism is a human trait. Humans need identity and a sense of belonging. It's in our DNA. We all want to be able to define ourselves in a way that gives us pride, in a way that separates us from others. And we want to belong to a community that we feel is special. That's, we're communal animals, and we want to be part of a community that we feel is special. But most of my listeners are busy living our lives. But there are way too many stupid, broken down, straight white Christian men who can't get laid, involuntary celibate men, who are being sold the idea that you too are part of something bigger than yourselves. Not only that, you're being persecuted. Your birthright, your country, has been stolen from you by Jews orchestrating the Great Replacement. This is what MAGA believes. Now, most of them don't say it openly, but more and more are, which is why Nick Fuentes had the #1 podcast on Spotify until they had to take him down. He's a self-avowed Nazi who's visited Mar-a-Lago. Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly have normalized him. The dirty, dark secret on Capitol Hill is Nick Fuentes is the most popular podcast among male Republican congressional staffers under the age of 30. This is where the Republican Party is heading. They believe, and Trump plays into this, and Steve Bannon identified these people in 2015. He was the first one to see the incels the involuntarily celibate men in chat rooms. And he said to Trump, you can mobilize these men into an army of supporters who believe immigrants, people of color, are flooding the border with non-Christian people of color, and they're going to vote you out of existence. They're going to vote you out of your home, your job. This is your home, not theirs. Are you angry? You should be. They're kicking you out of your own home. And we won't have a country left if we don't fight like hell and march down to the Capitol peacefully and patriotically and let them know, unquote. Donald Trump on January 6. January 6, what was it? It was white grievance, white male grievance. It was angry white men, many carrying the Confederate flag, wearing neo-Nazi tattoos, neo-Nazi symbols. It wasn't about policy. Partly they thought it was the election that got stolen, but at its core, it was a white male riot who believed the country was being stolen from them. Not the election. Our country is being taken from us. Real Americans taking their country back. Real America, heritage Americans. That's who these people are. Real Americans. Real Americans. There is a 24-hour news channel called Real America. It's ultra right-wing, pro-Donald Trump. And if you watch it, all they do all day is sing the praises of real Americans. And who are the real Americans? White, Christian, straight men. That's who it is. Real Americans. There is America, and then there's real America. And it's my country, not yours. We have what Donald Trump calls the enemy within. This is a term used by Hitler, used by Latin American dictators in Brazil, Chile, Argentina, throughout the 60s and the 70s. It's the language of authoritarianism, the enemy within. Trump says repeatedly, this is what he says, I honestly believe the biggest threat to America isn't Russia or China. The biggest threat to our country is the enemy within. His defenders say, well, he isn't really. He's talking about undocumented immigrants. That's all he's talking about. They're the enemy within. But last month, when Democrats wanted written into the Department of Homeland Security spending bill a provision that border and ICE agents cannot deport American citizens, Stephen Miller ordered the Rules Committee to get rid of it. He found that offensive because he has no problem with American citizens getting deported, which they are. It is why one of the demands Schumer and Jeffries are making right now is that the Department of Homeland Security spending bill will not pass unless written into it is a provision preventing ICE and Border Patrol from deporting U.S. citizens. This is something that shouldn't have to be written into a spending bill. It's already in the Constitution. But that's how lawless Stephen Miller's purge has become. Donald Trump is a liar, but he's a transparent liar. He tells you exactly what he wants, the kind of America he wants. He tells you what he'd like to do, what he's planning to do. He says it. I want to jail the opposition. I want to jail anyone who gets in the way of my grift, anyone I dislike, or anyone I'm intimidated by or jealous of. He's told us from day one what he wants and what he wants to do. And there is ultimately no ideology behind any of this other than the whim of this fascist authoritarian. There's no policy other than what's good for Trump, what makes him money or what makes him feel good or what satisfies his bloodlust. It is a fact-free environment. You can't discuss any of this with someone who has been brainwashed by Trump or didn't need to be brainwashed by Trump. This is tribal emotions. It's all about identity, which has nothing to do with reality. It's all about perception that's been distorted by self-loathing, and then the rage and fear that Trump triggers inside of people. Trump supplants reason, rational thought, ideological debate. It's all tossed out and replaced with feelings about race, religion, community, tribalism, feelings that most people are too afraid to articulate. They keep it to themselves, and they twist themselves into knots to justify why they're voting for Trump, because they can't admit to you or themselves how racist and hateful they are. Republicans in Congress right now are pretending this funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security is about protecting election integrity, protecting our borders, protecting jobs, keeping dangerous criminals out of the country. But their arguments collapse under the weight of intellectual rigor. There never was a border crisis. There is no crime wave. There is no evidence of voter fraud. There is no evidence of immigrants ripping off Medicare, Social Security, or Medicaid. Pay attention to what the scandal among Somalia immigrants in Minneapolis and Minnesota is really about. You cannot make a factual argument on behalf of anything the Republicans claim to be true. But if you're a racist, if you're a white Christian nationalist, a white supremacist, you will say, do, and believe anything just so you don't have to give up your birthright. I'm a white, straight, male Christian. I may not have much, but what I do have is America belongs to me, not you. It belongs to me. That is how Rupert Murdoch's Fox News has turned into a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut, convincing older white Americans, I may be broke, I may be stupid, I may eat the wrong food and drink too much, but I'm a real American. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to do to convince people to watch Fox News or storm the Capitol on January 6th. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you to Bob and Mila for keeping the conversation civil in the chat room. Please leave a comment. I cover a lot of material today. I may have misspoken. If I got anything wrong, if I got anything factually incorrect, please correct me in the comments section. I read all your comments. Please subscribe to this channel. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Please hit the like button so I remain in your feed. A lot of you say you have trouble finding the show. That doesn't surprise me. You know why. Hit the notifications bell so you're notified whenever there's a new episode. I have an irregular schedule because these shows take a lot of work. I'm a one-man operation here, so I do my own research, and I won't do a show until it's ready because I don't want to misspeak. I'm going to try to do another show tomorrow. I have a whole show on how dangerous it really is to work for ICE. But I know something's going to happen, and I won't have time to get to that. Anyway, thank you. Sorry the show went so long. Thank you.